what we want to do is start with a snapshot, I guess, set the scene. And so it's a great privilege to welcome to the stage Dr. Andy Marks, who is the Assistant Vice-chancellor, but more importantly, the co-founder of the university's Launchpad Business Incubator, which was obviously launched back in 2015, with branches in Wellington, Liverpool, of course, here in Parramatta, focused on tech SMEs, on innovation, a great initiative. So I'm going to stop talking so that Andy can start talking. It is early, but I do think we need to show appreciation for our speakers, so I think we need to disturb the people down on level 6. Really big it up because he is wicked. Would you please welcome to the stage Dr. Andy Marks.
G'day. Thanks everybody. Well, this is it. Catalyst West, we made it. Thank you so much for coming along. I'm going to try the Yes and stuff with my wife, but she's a fully paid up member of the Yes But Club, so I don't know how well I'll go. Today is about breaking rules. Today is about smashing through ceilings. Today is about saying, let's solve the unsolvable. In fact, that's a line that Scott Holmes, our Senior Deputy Vice-chancellor, came up when he was asked what Catalyst West is about for him. It's about saying, why do we accept that 200,000 people from the West every day have to drive into the city for work, for decent paying, engaging and exciting work? Why do we accept that? So ingrained is that modality that the ABC have made a TV series on it, Squinters, which is a bloody great show. I love Sam Simons and Jackie Weaver. That's the best car, I reckon, the one I'd want to be in. But so ingrained is that thinking. So inbuilt is the acceptance of that rationale that it's become part of popular culture. Why do we accept it? Why do we accept that nearly 80% of all federal and state government funding for startups goes into the Sydney CBD when there's a thriving startup culture out in the West? Why do we accept that? These are yes and moments, if you like. And why do we accept the same inequities with cultural funding? Why do we let these things go unchecked? Today is the day where we don't criticise this stuff, we don't accept it, but we actually try and find a new direction where we say new things are possible in the 4 areas we've identified. So setting the scene's a bit of a big job, so I had to get some really big personalities up here to help me do it. I'd like to invite up Ann Macgregor from the MCA, because what Liz does, I think, is central to everything, resilience in the arts. Ann, come up, please welcome her. Grab a chair, yeah. I'd love to invite up David Pring from KPMG, and as Barney said earlier on today would not be possible if somebody didn't take a punt on it, and that was David Pring. So David, could you come up? It was funny, when I went into David's office to pitch it to him, I sort of said, I'm not quite sure what it's going to be, and he said, great, I'm in. So that's what you want out of a consultant. So thank you, David. And last but not least, Tim Williams from Arup. If you want big ideas, Tim's your man. And I'm just very thankful you haven't brought your slide deck today, because they are always shocking. People will demand slides, but come up anyway.
It's anti-Welsh. We're very short. We're very short people.
You can stand if you like.
I am standing.
You don't need permission. So no big task, setting the scene, describing everything that's wrong and right with Western Sydney in 20 minutes, right? Pretty easy. That's why I'm going to start with you, Tim. Western Sydney is going to take the lion's share of population growth in the next 20 years. You've been an advocate of density done well. But how do you do density well in an area that has the expanse of Western Sydney, an area that's dispersed and has all of the bedeviling problems with connectivity? How do you do density well in that kind of space?
The first thing to do is not accept business as usual. And I think that's the point of the day, right? So the opportunity is enormous in many respects, right? Sydney has fantastic momentum. Put it in context, the Infrastructure Australia the other day said that Sydney would reach 8 million by 2046. That's 10 years faster than I estimated it 3 years ago, right? So I think it'll be about 2040. Right? We'll have 4 to 5 million people west of Parramatta by mid-century, right? Does anybody think that the systems that we have of planning infrastructure, the governance that we have, the democratic deficit there is at the heart of growing Sydney is sustainable? We will not end up with a place that we want. And I think that word place is important. I think the word we should ban in the discussion about the future is infrastructure. Infrastructure is not only meaningless, it's dangerous. It means that everything is the same. No, it's not. We need certain kinds of infrastructure to grow the kinds of place that we want in Western Sydney. I'll say a few things about what that place should be, right? Is that when you look at the health discrepancy between West and Eastern Sydney, it's about the lack of walkable precincts in Western Sydney. So why are we still permissioning greenfield developments that don't have pavements? Why are we still permissioning greenfield developments that actually don't have tree canopy? Why are we still building roads that don't have any street cover at all, in fact are not streets, and actually ban people from walking them? Why are we building roads when we should be building rail? So, you know, there's a fundamental discussion to be had, not about the quantum of growth in Western Sydney and the momentum, but the quality of growth. And the last point, I think, is a democratic deficit thing, right? Which is, how are we going to do governance differently so that the people of Western Sydney and the people of Sydney shape more of these decisions? At the moment, Sydney is a fiction and Western Sydney is a fiction. Sydney is what is done to us by about 10 different state government agencies, right? So we've got to do, in thinking about the money, the momentum, the growth, the airport, we have to think about governance, democratic deficit, community involvement, and the kinds of projects that will make this a great place by 2050.
Just quickly on that too, so is better governance essentially pulling away some of those layers you're talking about?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. Many people in the room have been involved in the city deal discussion between 8 councils, I think, in Western Sydney. I think it should also have included Blacktown myself, by the way, but 8 towns in Western Sydney. And 8 towns, I didn't say that for a fact, but I did know he was here. So, but 8 towns in Western Sydney, 8 councils in Western Sydney. And I think they've enjoyed a far greater city-shaping involvement as the only democratic tier, rather than the agencies involved, than they've ever had in conversations with state government agencies. I think they've found that actually they've been taken seriously. And I think we have to have more of that kind of involvement by elected local government in the city shaping decisions that affect their people, because nobody else, A, cares about their place as much as those people, and B, has the remit to care about place. Nobody cares about place except local government, frankly.
So the notion of place feeds into another theme of today, and for me, resilience is the central theme, really. It was the one that when we came up with them was most difficult to describe, which is always a good sign. So health ties into that, the way we live and connect as a community, transport and work all tie into resilience. But for me, one of the central tenets of resilience is arts and culture. Now, lots been said about the deficit between Commonwealth and state funding for the arts, comparing Western Sydney, for example, to Sydney. We don't get, I guess, a fair share of the pie. But Liz Ann, I want to ask you, is it as simple as increasing the slice of the pie, or is it something a little different that we need to be trying here? You've built some really great partnerships with the community in the West over many, many years. Is there a different model of funding and supporting arts and culture that we can work on out here?
I think there is, and I think it comes back to artists, and I think the fact that Western Sydney has the most incredible number of fabulous artists and arts organisations. I don't think, I'm with Tim, let's ban infrastructure. Let's talk about process and programmes and how we make fabulous communities where people want to live, putting artists at the heart of it. The reason why, the thing I'm most proud of about the MCA, you know, I love the extension, I love the fact that we've trebled our numbers, I love all that stuff. The thing I'm most proud of is our C3 West programme out here. And the reason for that is because artists are the people who come to us and find solutions to problems, whether it's looking at the future of Penrith, how can you get the city to turn back to the river? That idea started with an artist 10 years ago. How do you stop kids dumping cars in the river in Eards? Project we did with Campbelltown, Michael Tuffrey, 2 years on, no cars dumped in the river. So artists can contribute in so many different ways. And I think that there is such a great success story and enormous potential here. Yeah, there's a funding deficit, we all know that. But maybe in a way we've got to get beyond that and talk about making the arguments to grow the cultural sector by partnerships with government. Government does need to invest more. The level of investment is pretty dreadful. and there are plans afoot to address that at a forthcoming conference. And I think we have to get beyond, as I say, the east-west thing and really look at the whole city, Greater Sydney in particular, but also unlocking other sources of funding, whether it's working out what artists can contribute. We all know health projects where artists have been involved. There are endless opportunities for us to tap into new partnerships and bring, as I say, bring artists into the mix. I had a great vision coming here on the train. I thought, wouldn't it be fabulous if the Mayor of Liverpool, Khaled Sabsabi, was talking to the Mayor of Penrith, video artist Joan Ross, who was talking to Tony Albert, the Mayor of Blacktown. So why don't we have artists in these positions of local government and in positions of power? So I'd like to see artists really, I think Western Sydney could champion this idea of the artist at the centre of everything we do. It's perfect ground for it, and is obviously of great international significance too.
And this is great. We're already seeing a couple of things emerge here. So nobody's allowed to use the word infrastructure today, which I think is a very worthy rule, and the notion of a revolution in the way that we're governed in placemaking, and I think certainly having artists at the heart of the way local government occurs, it wouldn't be a bad thing in terms of injecting some creativity and some new thinking into that. You know, I guess the arts is about new ways of seeing, and that's what's been so wonderful about the projects you've discussed. David, talking about new ways of seeing. Western Sydney is Australia's small to medium enterprise heartland. It is the engine room, if you like, of this country at that level of business. How do you continue to support that sector, but also bring about the large-scale digital transformation we need to see? The labour market, the way we do business is changing, automation, digital disruption. So how do we do that with such a worthwhile and important sector, but also a very diverse sector? What's your experience of that in Western Sydney?
That whole question around digital transformation's quite interesting. I've worked in Western Sydney for 20 years. I've had my email account now for 23 years. And the fax machine was still turned on at that stage. I had someone request to send me a fax the other day, and we said, sorry, we can't do that. Can you scan it and send through? But from the whole question on place that we had earlier, we couldn't employ graduates 20 years ago in Western Sydney. Everyone was attracted to the bright lights elsewhere. Now we have the ability to attract as much talent. We can attract as much talent as we need locally, and I think that goes to part of the question around transformation going forward, is that attraction of talent to the region. From the small business perspective, the university's initiatives on Launchpad and being prepared to collaborate across organisations, I think is very important. And remember, a lot of the organisations that are around now that are $10 million, $50 million, $100 million turnovers were much smaller than that and have grown into those roles. Clients of ours that used to turn over $10 million now might turn over $100 million. And so how do those organisations collaborate with the startup community and with those great ideas? There's the whole piece around how the startups themselves grow, but I think the collaboration with existing organisations and being part of the journey for the larger organisations, being part of their growth engine is pretty important.
So I'm interested in that too. One of the big things that we've tried to encourage with your partnership through Launchpad, our incubator, is that cross-pollination between startups and more mature businesses. Do you think there's something to be had through that exchange in lumping those groups in together and seeing what happens?
Look, I think there is on two sides. Startups need a lot of support, but by their very nature, there's lots of them, and lots of them won't survive. The strongest will, and so those that are looking to support startups are looking for those to show some resilience themselves in terms of where they're going to get to. And I talk about the valley of death that startups need to crawl through before they'll get support. As they start to climb up up the other side. Yeah. But also I think it's part of the survival of the fittest piece. But on the other side of that, the larger organisations aren't good at aren't good at innovation, aren't good at looking for new ideas and developing those ideas internally. So the idea of being able to look outside the organisation and find other ideas and new ways of doing things can be very important for the growth of large organisations.
Yeah.
Bring in artists.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
Left field thinking, right? Yeah. Tim, I'm going to use the A word in a minute. Airport. And worse, I might even use the Aerotropolis word. So we talked about the importance of place, and you talked about precincts and walkability and so forth. And there are very, very big plans, of course, to encourage industry to set up around the airport. Again, how do you do that in the context of Western Sydney when we don't even have a train line connecting that space?
A couple of things. One is I was just remembering back on the digital front that I once made a business case for a fax. And it was turned down actually.
Fax.
Yeah. A couple of things about jobs, I think. Right. So I think the all the plans, all the stuff that we talk about at the moment, they don't have enough specificity or ideas about jobs in them. So even the Greater Sydney Commission report out recently looks to me to be far more certain about the residential future of Western Sydney than it is about the jobs future. And just a few thoughts in that context. One, I think the GSC plan, which is worth supporting, and it looks at centres, the importance of centres, of agglomerations. We now understand modern economic thinking, or rather old economic thinking, returning after the econometric nightmare that we've been through for 50 years, that place matters in economics. And so feeding further agglomerations in Sydney by mass transit, because only mass transit can get a large number of knowledge workers to one place, that is critical. So the jobs strategy is also therefore a mass transit strategy. And I was worried when I used to say this stuff that I was a bit alone on this, but IA last week actually said exactly the same. So the reason why infrastructure is not the same is that only certain kinds of infrastructure get you the jobs in a modern knowledge economy.
Aren't we seeing that though in that 30-minute city rhetoric,
Yep.
or is that the problem, that it is just rhetoric?
No, it's good to have the rhetoric, right? So never ever diss rhetoric. I've made an entire career on it. So, but you've got to back it up, right? So the thing is that one of the things we asked for in the Committee for Sydney response to this was what's the transit program that gives you the 30-minute city? And also not to forget that if you live in far western Sydney, you might still want to get to the CBD. So you don't want it to be a 90-minute city inadvertently. So that the fast transit from east to west is important to the functioning of Western Sydney, as is the north-south transit through the airport. So I think transit is pretty fundamental. And if we just have the airport and residential development, we will not have the jobs that we need. And I think the second thing is around the good news is look at some international exemplars, and nothing is ever the same when you look at compare two things. But it is instructive that the Canary Wharf is, and all the Stratford development in East London, all these places were far-flung places in places you didn't think could possibly support professional and financial services jobs. The rail between them shrank the psychological and market distance between them. And now 100,000 people are earning $200,000 a year in Canary Wharf in a dock where nobody was working in 1981. And it was mass transit was at the heart of that. And just to give you a flavour of the we have to think about the processes. I think we need to go back to what Lisanne was saying. It doesn't sound exciting to talk, what do we want? A process. When do you want it? Well, when you can get round to it, But a good process for determining infrastructure. We haven't got one. We've got a highly politicised process for determining infrastructure. But what you can get when you have a proper process is that the appraisal that was done of Canary Wharf, Jubilee Line, fast rail to it, by traditional measures said only 1.1 business case. That is, it wasn't worth doing. The whole transformation of East London was based on that error. So we need to have a process which justifies putting a lot of rail investment into Western Sydney for the future of Sydney.
I'm interested in the transformation angle too, and I'm thinking about this in the context of resilience again, and the Mona is seen as a transformative, and I'm going to use the infrastructure word, transformative piece of arts and culture infrastructure in Hobart, Tasmania. Yeah. I mean, can they have that effect, and why did it work there?
Well, it's very specific why it worked there, but it's not about a building. It's actually about the programs and what you actually offer people when they come to a place. And again, it's back to, you know, fabulous things that people want to engage with. And I think there's so much opportunity with the airport in particular. We do not want to see the same old kind of buildings, the same old kind of planning, the same old kind of things which we know haven't worked. And that's why when we started doing the program with Penrith, the Future of Penrith, we brought in these two amazing artists who worked in the suburbs of Paris, who were dealing with similar issues about how do you make cities out of suburbs and actually give this sense of belonging and people wanting to live there. And there's so much interesting thinking that we should be bringing to the, what's it called, Erytropolis or whatever it's called. And it's kind of heartbreaking to see that already even there's, you know, the things are moving forward, and I don't think the people that have got the kind of creative ideas to rethink how those things might work are being brought into it. And not to build something and then add programs afterwards is a real problem. You have to have that, as Tim says, the process, the thinking, the artists in there, the creative people actually contributing to it and chucking crazy ideas in. And some of them will get thrown out and some of them will get picked up. But that's really how you create a vibrant and wonderful city, as London is, as we know. You can't add public art. Everybody goes, oh, let's have public art. Yawn. You know, and most of it's terrible. You know, I'm thinking of starting the public art demolition squad. You know, it's awful. And what you really want is artists who actually work with community, with business, with politicians, whatever it takes, to come up with creative ways of making the places we live more livable and places that we all want to visit.
At the beginning.
At the beginning.
Start.
Yeah. So, David, thinking about the businesses that you work with, how open are they to those ideas about getting involved in arts projects and transformative projects that, if you like, stray from what they may view as their core business? What level of openness is there, do you think, to that kind of creativity in business?
I think that's mixed. I think there is a lot more openness to collaboration across fields and outside of existing organisations than there was. You know, even the concept of collaboration between business and universities 20 years ago was much less. We had some conversations, but didn't quite know what to do with it. That's developed greatly now. I think that perhaps in the artist space, that we're perhaps in that place at the moment where we're having conversation, but what do we do with it and how do we take it forward? I think though that there's so much that to learn from outside of our own spheres and from outside our own areas, and to learn the stories and to learn the experiences that are happening in spaces that are close to us or adjacent to us. And there's so many of those stories and experiences from Western Sydney to share and to learn from.
Yeah. Look, we're getting close to wrapping up, and I'm going to ask you each to, if you like, give me the one big idea you'd like to emerge from today, and that would be one big new direction, if you could. Tim?
I think we should. It's a process thing, you know. Which is it's amazing. I'm the least process of people, but I think we should all agree in the principle of that if we've got this major opportunity to do two things in Sydney. One is we're on a journey in existing Sydney from suburban to urban. So how do we do that? So conceptualizing the shift. I think the second thing is we're also going to be creating new places in Western Sydney, new centres, not residential development. Again, the second phrase to ban residential development, right? It's places that we're making. So what are the principles of great placemaking? So I think we should just establish the principles of great placemaking, largely places we want to live in, by the way. So, and then make sure that they infect the system of decision-making around infrastructure. So placemaking, what do we mean by a great place in Western Sydney going forward?
Definitely involving artists at the very early level. I was just thinking about how to illustrate how well this can work, because I think it is about the questions that artists ask that others don't think of. And I remember I started thinking about this with an Irish artist who was in residence at the Barbican in London, that Augusta Art Centre, and there was a very serious board, and they invited the artist in residence in to explain what he was doing, and they were expecting him to bring his paintings or his sculptures or whatever he'd done, and he walked in and he got up a whiteboard, it's a long time ago, and wrote up on it, to the chairman, your secretary doesn't know about this, and the engineer from here has never met this person here. And over 20 minutes, he mapped the organisation from what he called radiator conversations. I guess in Australia it'd be water coolers. So he had actually gone around and chatted to everybody, and he gained all this extraordinary knowledge and was able to articulate it in a completely different way from anybody else. A management consultant would have come up with a very different map. What you then do with that, of course, is the question. But I think that really illustrates how the creative process can work and can contribute if you're actually open to allowing it to come in. And I think all the processes, whether it's the new airport or business development or whatever it is, would really benefit from working with the kinds of artists who, it's not all artists, but there are kinds of artists who can contribute in that way.
Great. David, what big thing would you like to see?
I'd just like to see the mindset of collaboration extend right throughout the community. We've heard about the infrastructure word and what's being spent on roads, rail, airports, etc. But if we use that as a metaphor for open minds and connectivity between the smart ideas and organisations in the region, then I think we'll do really, really well.
It's a place, culture and collaboration, I think, are critical themes. So that's it for this session, but I'm just reminding you as well that, and I'm sure Nigel will too, that the app has a series of questions and polling questions that engage these very issues, and we want to hear what you guys think as well, and we'll be updating you on that. But for now, I'd like you to put your hands together and congratulate and thank Liz Ann, David and Tim. Thank you.